My name is Muchaneta Napel, and I have the pleasure of interviewing Lauren Bartley from Ganni this morning. And hopefully we get to cover quite a lot of ground because I've got a lot of questions to ask you. But if you don't mind just quickly introducing yourself to the audience.
Yeah, of course. So my name's Lauren and I work for a company called Ganni. So for those of you that don't know, we are a Danish womenswear brand based out of Copenhagen. And I am the Chief Sustainability Officer and have been with the company for 5.5 years now.
I think that there seems to be quite a big rise on having a chief sustainability officer in a company these days, because I think a lot of fashion brands need somebody to lead them in the sustainability journey. So could you share with us the journey that Ganni is currently on when it comes to becoming a sustainable brand?
Yeah, for sure. So I joined the company in late 2018, and I was the first person hired in a non-existent sustainability team. And my directive was from the founder of the company, Nikolai, who's very personally passionate about about sustainability. And yeah, the directive was to come in and to build a sustainability strategy. And that was kind of it. And there was free rein on what that looked like. And as I'm sure, like many of you obviously know, there's a lot of issues within the fashion industry, and so you can kind of pick which one you want. And we decided as a company to look at sustainability holistically. And so, yeah, by 2019, it was really about building that first sustainability strategy. What did it look like? Which ended up being what we call the game plan, which was 44 goals for Ganni to reach by 2023. And those goals were across people, planet, product, and prosperity. And then we had, goals within those sections to reach.
And how hard was it to reach those goals? Because I feel like the industry is well known for setting goals. And I think it's good that they can focus as well on what they're doing really well. But what are some of the challenges that you face? Because I feel like people can learn from the challenges more than what you did well on.
Yeah, for sure. But then what we actually did with those 44 goals is then each year when we wrote the sustainability report, we reported on progress on each of the goals. And it was a status out of 100. So we had to also report if we hadn't made any progress on a goal and what was the reason. And that was really like what started us on this journey of communicating about sustainability honestly and transparently, and also talking about the challenges of, hey, we have this goal, we need to reach it in 4 years, but we have absolutely no idea how to do it, or we haven't been able to prioritize it this year because there's other things that have come up, and we had to do that every year. And I think part of that public accountability actually really helped us in achieving our sustainability strategy, because we ended up achieving those 44 goals a year earlier than planned. And so now we're on the second version of the strategy. But yeah, some of those goals were more like actions, and other ones were like way more tangible. Like one of the goals, for example, was to become a B Corp certified company. But then another one would have been to create a strategy for gender equality, or another goal was to set an ambitious carbon reduction target. So they were really, really varied.
So which was your hardest goal?
I think the carbon reduction goal is still the hardest, actually. So we moved from an intensity-based goal to an absolute reduction goal. So now we have a goal to reduce our carbon emissions 50% by 2027. And for a company that's still growing, that's obviously extremely difficult, and it does feel like a moonshot goal. But it's super important for us that we have this goal that's very ambitious and pushes us in a direction, and then also very transparently we talk about how we think that we're going to get there. But how we think we're going to get there is very reliant on innovation and technology, and that is somewhat out of our control because we are not building those innovations or technologies. We're very much reliant on other people to help us do that. So that's obviously a challenge.
And talking about technology and innovation, I had the pleasure of talking to Nikolai at an event, and he spoke about Ruby Labs, collaborating with them in terms of helping the Ganni brand move forward. How is that collaboration going thus far?
Yeah, really good. So we also set up a program called Fabrics of the Future, which is where we scan the market and then we look for innovations and materials or technologies that replace materials as we know them today. So we had moved from a point of sourcing, only conventional cotton to then only sourcing organic cotton or recycled cotton. And now we're in this phase of like, okay, what does the cotton of the future look like? Is it grown in a lab? Is it bio-based? How do we obtain this material? And that's sort of the phase we're in now. And we have 30 innovations that are within the portfolio of fabrics of the future. And it's not just about like incubating these innovations, it's also about launching them. So we have a goal that 10% of our collections by 2025 need to be made from these fabrics of the future. And Ruby Labs is one of them. So Ruby Labs is this very, very awesome carbon capture technology. So they capture carbon from the atmosphere. They use this technology that they have built and able to then like spin it into a cellulose yarn, which is really crazy. And of course, like they're on their own journey themselves. They're an innovator, but what we can do as Ganni is support them. And that is committing to buying this material when it's readily available, helping raise awareness of this innovation at like public speaking events and things like that. And so, yeah, we really need to support these innovations and innovations like Ruby Labs because we ultimately will be relying on them in the future.
I love the fact that you've used the word support because I don't know if you know, but I've worked a lot within the fashion innovation space and I've seen fashion brands try to support new innovation and a lot of them don't manage to do it. If anything else, they kind of like learn from them a little bit and then shelve them. But it sounds to me that you are actually seeing your future in these textiles and therefore your support is more long-term as opposed to short-term.
Yeah.
Am I right in this?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think we noticed it ourselves when we switched all of our materials from conventional to either organic, recycled, or third-party proven lower impact, that actually that's not even going to shift the needle enough on reducing our carbon footprint. And so we need something else. We need innovation. And that's just super important for us to, support these innovations. And, we're not the biggest company out there. We can't necessarily always support financially to the same level that a larger brand would be able to do. But how we can support is by making a commitment. And oftentimes it's also sharing knowledge because they might be an expert in what they do, but we are also experts in fashion. And so we can say like, hey, this is what other brands will be looking for. This is the texture that we'll be needing. This is how we want to be able to use your material. This is the application that it's for. Like we can provide that knowledge and it actually becomes a partnership rather than us just extracting something from them until,
I mean, I like that idea because most partnerships never are partnerships because usually one person gains and the other person is used, I guess you could say. I do have a question that I want to throw in there. It's a bit of a devil's advocate. I guess I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit. I've heard the argument that as an industry, we need to first deal with the materials, the textiles that we currently have now before we support new textiles coming into play. For example, recycling and sorting and trying to kind of, I guess, figure out what to do with what we have now as opposed to bringing new ones in. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think we can equally support new materials while dealing with the traditional textiles that we have now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's essential. But again, we can work on these things at the same time because unfortunately the space of fiber to fiber recycling and textile recycling, while it's gaining traction, is also very slow. So we can't also place our bets on, okay, in 5 years, like we're going to be able to recycle cotton at scale or polyester or figure out how to recycle our shoes. That is also happening and we're investing in those technologies too and piloting a lot of projects there. But we can't also just sit there and be like, okay, they'll figure it out. And then once they figured it out, we'll jump into it. We have to like work on these things simultaneously. And that's also why our strategy is actually very holistic because you find that, okay, you're moving around a lot of like, okay, there's like a lot of advancement in the space of innovation. And so let's have these 4 pilot projects. And then, oh, there's something over here with textile recycling. Okay. And luckily, we're lucky enough to have a team of 5 people that are only working on sustainability and working on like various aspects of it. So.
When it comes to sustainability, what do you think is more important, impact or scaling? Because I feel like it's either one or the other to a degree. Like a lot of textiles, new textiles, find it really hard to scale, but they have a really strong impact, I personally think.
Yeah.
So what do you think we should focus on when it comes to new textiles? Making an impact or focus on scaling that particular textile?
Honestly, I think both, but I think that's also a luxury right now. And I think, especially in the space of innovation, we really need to support the innovators in scaling. That should be the priority, and getting enough brands and businesses on board into adopting these innovations, which will allow then for them to be able to have the impact that they can have. But I think scale is very important.
So scale first in order to have an impact. I think that's quite a good answer, actually, because someone asked me that once, and I was kind of like, okay, do I have to choose?
Yeah.
So I wanted to throw that at you and see what your thoughts are on that. But let's talk about money. I think money is like a dirty thing. People don't like to talk about money. They always feel a bit like, why should we discuss what we're spending, or why should we discuss how much something costs? But I really think money is very impactful when it comes to making a change and being sustainable. So do you think that the fashion industry needs to financially invest more in being sustainable?
Yes.
And invest less in PR and marketing? But, I feel it's one of those industries that just doesn't have a research and like an R&D department, which would make sense in the situation we're in, that we all have an R&D department, whether it's a team of 2 or a team of 40, just somebody looking at what's going on, finding out information, educating the company. So do you kind of feel like, for us to kind of figure ourselves out of this situation, we need to have R&D on board? The industry needs to invest in its future through R&D.
Yeah, I think so. I think like a lot of it is research and development, but the other thing is like there's so many solutions out there that are already scaled or readily available. It's just making a different choice. And I think to your point, a lot of it comes down to money, and people don't want to spend more money on something that they don't necessarily feel an immediate return on investment, or okay, the customer's not asking for sustainability, and so therefore I don't need to do it. Like it's in a way, it's not good enough. And I would say, like, we do a lot of stuff at Ganni across social responsibility, environmental responsibility, innovation, and we still spend only 1% of our annual revenue on sustainability. So I think there's been a lot of conversations around cost, but truly understanding how much is this costing, I think that's just a blocker, that it costs too much, and I don't want to look into it until it's scaled, but actually how much is it costing? And I'm not trying to be like naive. Some things are very expensive. For example, when we work with a fabric innovation, it's typically maybe 3 times more expensive than its like conventional counterpart. We also need to understand that is the journey of it. And if more people then adopt it, of course, then it's scalable. It can become commercially viable. And honestly, maybe the materials that we have now are just too cheap, that you shouldn't compare them. Honestly, I think that's one part of it. But obviously we get asked this question a lot around cost, and I had reflected on it recently of like, okay, like financially it's like not costing as much as maybe you think it would cost, but actually there is a cost, and that more comes into the cost on the things that you don't do and the things that you then miss out on. And I can give like the very tangible example that one of those initial goals that we had in the first strategy was to phase out the use of virgin leather in our collections by 2021 for ready-to-wear and 2023 for footwear and accessories, because leather was the highest carbon emitting material that we used. But actually we were not even using a lot of it. I think it was like 8% of our total material mix, but it was like nearly 50% of our carbon impact on materials, which for us as a company that's then priding themselves on climate action and decarbonization, and we need to get to this 1.5 degree target, the justification for still using leather when we're not a leather brand and having this equally ambitious carbon target at the same time, they were kind of at odds with each other. So that obviously is a huge financial decision. Leather was, even though it was small, we were selling our leather products very well. We had some very iconic Ganni styles that were made in leather, like cowboy boots that we had. And yeah, ultimately then we went on this journey of finding alternatives to something that was already working, actually, from a financial perspective, which I'm pleased to say that we did make that goal, and we did manage to phase out virgin leather from our collections at the end of last year. However, for these cowboy boots in particular, we couldn't find an alternative for two of the colors that we had. So we had like one red cowboy boot and the other one was like a cognac color, which you can't replicate those colors in the depth that you need with the material innovations that are available today. And so at the end of last year, we had to sit in a meeting with our CEO, CFO, and executive team and say, we've been very public about this goal of phasing out virgin leather. It will reduce our carbon emissions between 10 to 20% if we completely phase out. But we don't have the alternative for two of these colors, and we can't lie to you and say that maybe we'll have it in 12 months or 18 months. Like, we don't actually see that there is a future where we can replicate these colors. And that those two colors in particular were making up like 2 million Danish kroner in sales. And so there was a decision of, do you want to keep this high-performing boot selling because it performs well, no one's really questioning that it's made out of leather, the average consumer maybe doesn't know that you have this like leather phase-out goal, or do you stick to your values and say, hey, we've also been very public about this goal, we've also gained a lot from it. We were awarded a PETA award for progress of phasing out leather 2 years ago, and actually, yeah, what's more important to you? And luckily for us, like we work in a value-led company, that the decision was taken of like, no, we just can't sell these two shoes, and we're gonna stick to our values, and values win over finance.
Yes.
And I'm not saying, honestly, that will happen every time we're faced with a challenge in sustainability, but those are the things that then cost you.
Do you know what? If I had a pair of those shoes, they'll be so valuable to me now because I know they're never going to be made again. That I would most likely give them to my children to my grandchildren, and so forth.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's what's missing in fashion. That's what's missing in this industry, is valuing and respecting our garments.
Yeah.
And if you are able to make such a decision, if other brands were able to do the same, then maybe we will hold on to that dress a little longer because we know it's not going to be available again. You know? But you talked about consumers, and I want to talk about consumers because I feel like educating them is something that a lot of brands don't do. They tell them what they're doing, but they don't educate them on what they mean. I mean, if somebody was to tell me their CO2 emission, I'd be like, what is that? Do you see what I mean? If I was a customer, I wouldn't understand. Yeah. So how are you going forward in terms of educating the Ganni consumer?
To be honest, I think it's something that we really struggle with because we have a dedicated Instagram account called Ganni Lab, which is an Instagram account where the feed is 100% dedicated to our journey on becoming a responsible brand. It's great. We talk about how, okay, like now we're using 100% recycled polyester, but we know that's not good enough. So we're looking into these 4 innovations that are from fiber to fiber, polyester recycling. Or we talk about how we reduced our carbon emissions 2% on materials, but actually our total emissions that year grew. So we do a lot of education there and a lot of transparent communication on where we are on our journey and the successes, but also the challenges. But that communication is for an already informed customer. That is for someone that knows the industry, for one. They know something about sustainability and they're very passionate about it, that they understand the content of that Instagram channel. Where we're sort of struggling now is the average Ganni customer. When you walk into a Ganni store, what do you really experience? Because you're actually just having a normal shopping experience, and you'll see that on the hang tag of the dress, it will say it's made from organic cotton. So that's not really educating the masses, which is what we need to try and work on, basically. So yeah, that's our biggest challenge for this year, while also like the greenwashing legislation has now been approved by the EU. We're really having to think about how we educate, but differently to how we have before.
quick question to the audience. How many of you feel like the brands that you buy are educating you on their sustainability initiatives? No one. Okay, if anyone's brave, oh, you feel like you're being educated by your brands? I agree. I think the marketing thing is what you mentioned earlier, the greenwashing. They're going to really I mean, has anyone heard about what EU's has, I guess, approved, right, with regards to greenwashing, that brands are no longer allowed to greenwash in terms of their marketing, and they have to have scientific proof to support it. Is anyone brave enough to share what you would like a brand to do in terms of educating you as a consumer? One thing that you feel like they can do? Anyone wants to share? No one? Well, I can share.
Yeah.
What I would like to do. I think for me, it's the kind of the words that are used, the jargon.
Yeah.
The jargon, you know, I mean, the fact that I work in sustainability, I kind of know what it all means. But if I was to put my kind of consumer hat on, some of the jargon they use, I'm lost.
Yeah.
It means nothing to me. Like
Yeah.
if you say it's 100% this or it's 50% that, I'd be like, okay.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah.
how do you hope to educate a consumer with the jargon? Do you hope to explain it a bit further, do short videos, TikTok, I don't know, like use social media as a way to explain what some of these words mean so they can understand the journey better? Because
Yeah.
if you're showing them this is what we've done, but if they don't understand what that means,
Yeah.
how do you envision pushing forward so you are able to connect with your consumer and make sure they understand your journey so they
Yeah.
can appreciate what you've done so far?
Yeah, and I think like this is like very operational, but we have actually just kicked off internally a sustainability branding project for this very reason of like, I also feel the pain if you work in marketing. You need snappy headlines, you need a short sentence, you need to grab people's attention, and you're not going to do that by saying, this piece is made from 50% recycled cotton and 50% organic cotton that is from a GOTS certified factory. GOTS means this. Like, it's very difficult. And here's the supply chain, and there's 4 steps to the supply chain, and it was span here and weaved here. Like, it's very, very difficult. So I think we're in the process now of figuring out how we can add a lot of more factual-based information, but still in a way that it makes sense. So, for example, for a lot of years, we've been using like this headline of like responsible and then communicating underneath what it is. We know that that's not going to fly anymore. So the word responsible would be removed, and then it's just very factual about what that is that we're actually trying to say. And then, yeah, a layer of communication underneath. But I think it's like this, that traditional like hierarchy of information of, okay, what's the top line message going to be, which will have to be very factual, and then all the evidence to back it up. And it's really interesting working with our marketing teams, because then you try and explain something like supply chain traceability, and they're like, okay, so we just say who made our clothes and it's this factory. And like, no, it's this, and then it just becomes very complicated. But we actually spend a lot of time on educating the teams internally and the teams that are experts in knowing how to do this, rather than the sustainability team be the ones driving the communication. So I think that worked for us in the past with Ganni Lab and the very technical side of it, and it needs to work again for like mass communication.
I'm very interested to see how, because I come from a fashion PR background, so I'm very interested to see how they're going to push forward a product in a way that won't get them into trouble. You know.
Oh yeah, or won't be very boring, honestly, and just be very
Yes.
technical that still people just glance over it. Because I think with the regulation coming, is requiring a lot more businesses to be more forthcoming about what they're actually doing. But at the same time, you don't just want to like slap on a certification or like the transaction certificate or supply chain traceability information with no context. You also need to storytell and explain what that is. So
I can see brands not explaining anything.
No,
Just
but
being
that's
absolutely silent.
But I think that's actually happened if you look at, like, this is not to call anybody out, but if you look at French brands in particular, because this legislation has hit them a lot sooner. If you look on like the websites of some of these French brands, you can see that actually they've just put this information out there with no context. and then no one's really asking for it or not really understanding why it is. And I can understand why they've put it on there because they legally have to, but it's such a missed opportunity to be able to educate people and explain, like, hey, this is why I'm sharing this information with you, not just because I have to, because I actually want to. I want you to be more informed about the origin of your clothes or what materials are actually used in fashion. And so I'm hoping that we as Ganni can maybe take up some of that space.
I mean, overall, when it comes to legislation, are you for legislation, or are you thinking, ugh, just leave us to it, we know what we're doing? Like, What's your take on legislation? Are you supporting what's coming?
Yes and no. Like in general, I'm like really supportive of it because I think it levels out the playing field for a lot of companies, and it really has got a lot of brands moving on the topic, and probably from like a risk-based or fear-based approach, which is not ideal, but it gets people talking about the same topics and moving forward. That I'm obviously all for, and just regulating our industry because we need to. But on the flip side of it, yeah, what I'm more concerned about is just how this information is then being shared, and that maybe it's public, but it's hidden somewhere when you could really have an opportunity to, really educate and raise the awareness level and the education level of a lot of people, like a lot of shoppers, honestly, that could then inform their decision making and purchasing decisions. And of course, I'm a little bit worried about it from the Ganni side of things because we trial a lot of innovations, we pilot project a lot of different initiatives, and that's not us claiming that they're going to be like the next thing, but we like to talk about it because we like to raise awareness of what's out there. And maybe there is a risk that could seem like greenwashing if we don't have a 3-year plan to work with that particular innovation or whatever it might be. Like we still want to be able to communicate the small things we're doing, even if they don't succeed in the end.
I mean, I think you communicating it educates us, so we know what's going on. So if you say this and this is happening, then it'll make me want to go look at what that is and how I can apply it to the industry as a whole. So I think that is very important. I mean, how many of you in the audience are for legislation or against? Who's for legislation? One hand. Okay. And who's against legislation for the fashion industry? Just one person. I'd love to know why. Oh, hello. Nice to see you again. Would you like to tell us why you're against it?
Shall I start again?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I'm still hoping that we will all get to the phase that we were responsible enough to do it ourselves, because the legislation forces us to put a lot of energy and financial capacity into this whole nitty-gritty of getting it visible. So first thing is we need to do it for ourselves, to learn in our own value chain what is happening. And legislation, well, we are getting scared from it a little bit, and we transfer the money we need for it into getting it, thinked, getting it done for legislation. How do you call that in English? Well, sorry, I don't know the word at the moment, but okay. We need to do it ourselves.
I mean, I understand that angle, but I mean, I think the industry is not able to self-regulate. Or am I being completely pessimistic here? But I do feel like it's become they're teenagers, and mum and dad have come home and they've said enough. These are this is the structure we're going to give you, and you have to follow these rules in order to do better for yourself.
Yeah.
Because I think there's very few brands like your own brand who are able to take that responsibility seriously. I think a lot of companies try, but don't achieve it, or don't realize how difficult it is to make that change.
Yeah. No, I would agree, but I also agree with this lady's point that actually, from what I hear, there's also a lot of brands that do genuinely really good work that are now also going to shy away from communicating that work that they do because they're just worried of being called out for it. And that's a real shame too. If you're doing genuine work, you should be able to have a platform to talk about it and again, like raise the awareness. And I think it would be a real shame for those brands doing genuine work just to step back and do then the bare minimum of what's required for them, or just use it as a tick box exercise rather than just like being progressive. I hope that it doesn't hinder like a more progressive nature as well for some brands.
I think that's a really strong point, actually, in terms of progression, because if we fear to showcase, then we are not going to progress any further. Like you said, it's going to be a tick list. It's going to be, okay, done, done, done. Moving on.
Yeah.
Rather than actually self-inspired kind of like progression where you're like, I have to do this, I want to do this, so this is what I'm doing. I mean,
Yeah.
I never heard of it from that point of view, actually. So in general, what is your vision going forward for Ganni? In terms of sustainability.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Let's say 2024, so now it's not so general.
2024. We have a 2025 vision and strategy actually that we're working towards, which I'm happy to share. And that is that 100% of our contractual suppliers are paid a living wage. So we have around 40 of them right now. We're in a 17 of them to date are being paid a living wage. And that's not to say that the others are not being paid a living wage, but it's to say that we actually just don't know. Some of them may be above the living wage benchmark, and some of them may fall below it. And maybe that sounds like, okay, 2025, that's really far off. Why are you not moving faster, or why don't you know this by now? And there's a lot of complexity in it, that it's actually very sensitive to obtain this information from a supplier, and also to assure that supplier that you're not going to use this information then against them to get yourself like a cheaper price on a product, for example. So, and it's to say that where we're closing the living wage gap, Ganni is paying for that out of its margin. It's not putting that on the supplier to increase that gap itself. So that's a vision for 2025, which I think is more than achievable. We, of course, are working towards the 50% carbon reduction by 2027. 10% of our materials that we use should be sourced from Fabrics of the Future innovations. 5% of our revenue should be coming from circular business models by 2025, which for us hopefully looks like resale and secondhand. We have tried rental, but it has not been working out so well for us. And then, we also have a program called Carbon Insetting, which is where we directly invest in the suppliers that we work with to implement solar panels onto the factory roofs, because that also helps reduce our emissions. And through that, we're also able to create stronger contractual ties with the supplier. So we have had 4 projects already where we've implemented the solar panels at the factories, which Ganni funds, and then we have 2 more to do by 2025.
Sounds like you're going to be one busy woman in 24, 25. I mean, I think it's important, the fact that you mentioned living wage, fair wage. I feel like a lot of brands don't understand that to be sustainable, to be a sustainable brand, or a responsible brand, or a fair brand, you need to take into account the people who are actually at that bottom rung of the supply chain. You know, they need to also get a fair wage as well. And that's what makes you sustainable, I guess. But I do have a question, because you mentioned just a moment ago that you tried rental. This seems to be something that a lot of fashion brands are trying to kind of go forward with. Because it's another way they can be more sustainable. It's another way for them to make money. What was the pros and the cons of you doing rental?
I think the pros was just to test the receptiveness in the market, but we did the rental program initially in Denmark, and Ganni is a very, very familiar brand in Denmark. It's been there for over 10 years. We're very mature in that market. And actually the secondhand market for Ganni is very high in Denmark. So it actually turned out that you could rent a Ganni piece for like 1 week for the same price that you'd probably be able to buy it secondhand. So that didn't work out so well, but it gave us a lot of learnings. But I think on the pros, that was obviously great because we were able to test the market, and then we launched actually the concept in London with a partner, and that worked really well. And I think London, where the brand is then not so familiar, is relatively new. Maybe the customer is slightly different as well. But I think the biggest learning was that initially we tried to do it on our own. So it was just like a white label platform, only Ganni products. And when we had our products on a multi-brand site, that's when it was more impactful, because maybe you don't actually just want to shop a Ganni rental. You want to shop a multitude of brands and then choose Ganni. So I think that was the biggest learning, that if we go into resale or repairs or rental again, that it actually needs to be multi-brand and in collaboration with others, and not just trying to do this alone.
So I think rental's pretty tough for brands to adopt this as another revenue stream. It seems quite challenging of being able to rent out a product and make sure that, you know, that it's clean and that it's sent on time. The kind of like delivery and everything, it's quite a lot going on.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's something to solve the problem. But with regards to waste management, which is something that has been a topic of conversation, especially in 2023, what are some of Ganni's strategies in terms of circularity and waste management?
Yeah, so we have a dedicated person that looks after circularity who's in the audience. So yeah, it's multi-pronged again. So we have, when it comes to circularity, we start at the beginning. So we have a goal around designing for circularity. So how can we design the products at the beginning of their life to put them in a better opportunity to be repaired or recycled at the end? We have a goal around that. It's extremely difficult, to be honest, because Ganni is also a very colorful brand with lots of prints and also lots of trims, which is not exactly aligning with how you recycle garments. So we have tailored that goal that, okay, 100% of the t-shirts that we produce, which is actually a lot, they should be designed for circularity. So it means ensuring that the main fabric, for example, if it's recycled cotton, that actually then the stitching is also the same fabrication, and then looking at the print technique that we have on the t-shirts or the size of the print. So that's one element of it. And then we have, the circular business models side of it. So we have a repairs station in London that we want to expand, and then we also want to look more into resale. And then when it gets to like the end of life, of course our priority is to sell everything that we produce, but unfortunately that's not where we are right now. But the priority then is to invest in fiber to fiber recycling, and also then a lot of like innovations in the space where maybe we'll donate products for like testing. So for example, actually we just signed a partnership agreement or a pilot project with a company called Refibered that are based in the US, and they have a high spectrum camera that's AI powered that can basically sort garments within 2 seconds. So you're able to put it under the scanner. It can tell you what the composition is of the clothing within 2 seconds, which is really cool.
Very fast.
Yes, which is right now a very manual process. And they're not the only company doing it, but again, it's like investing in companies like this of like, okay, we'll enter into a partnership, we'll trial something, and then because ultimately we need to be able to sort our clothing and then put it in the best place possible to be recycled or to be like the most valued. And then we also have agreements with others like Infinited Fiber and RenewCell, so more fiber to fiber technologies, and also a company called Amber Cycle, which is polyester recycling. So that's really, really the priority. And we just want to get as much fiber to fiber recycled as possible.
It's quite good to hear you mention companies like RenewCell, who you are collaborating with, because I think that when it comes to making that changes as a brand, it is going to be only through collaboration.
Yes.
You know, so what are some of the collaborators that you are looking forward to working with?
I think the material innovations that I mentioned, they're obviously really exciting. And now we're starting to look into more technological innovation. So, for example, Refibered is one of them, which is a technology. We also, probably confidentially, but I think I can say it, we have a project coming up that's EU funded, which is about using space technology for non-space industries. So how we can use satellite data from space to help inform things that we're doing. So if we could map like biodiversity risk areas or hotspots around our supply chain, then it would enable us to be able to prioritize and help build our biodiversity strategy. Stuff like that is very cool.
That is very cool.
Yeah, but like ultimately everything that Ganni does on sustainability is through partnership and collaboration. You know, we have carbon consultants, we have a company that supports with a platform for traceability and transparency information. We have all of these material innovators, and that's really the power of it. We're still a relatively small company that does not have the resource to have this in-house expertise, and so we really are outsourcing a lot of expertise in order to make this possible. And that's why I think that honestly a lot of brands becoming sustainable or being on a sustainable journey is more than achievable, because there's so many solutions out there when you just start having a conversation with people.
So what would you say, let's say we are, I don't know if we are, but let's say this whole room is full of fashion brands and they're all here to learn from you. What are the key things do you want them to take away with? Like in terms of collaborating with innovations, collaborating with people, what are the 3 things would you say to them? This is what you need to do in order to be a bit more sustainable, a bit more responsible.
Yeah, I think if you were just starting on your sustainability journey, like the way that we approached it was like very holistic and tackling all areas at the same time, which worked for us, but I don't think that would work in every company. And I think it's really about like picking your priorities, and you don't have to be front running or industry leading on every single area. I think then the impact part comes into it of like, it's far more impactful actually if you focus on 1 or 2 areas and really make progress in that area than it is to spread yourself so thin that you don't really achieve that much, but you're doing a lot, but you don't really know what. And I think then secondly, it needs to be tied with your brand values. And we are very lucky that sustainability or responsibility became one of Ganni's core brand values. And that is the way that we've been able to succeed, because it's become of value to the company. It's not the reason why people work at Ganni, but it's definitely attractive from an employee retention and onboarding perspective. And again, like we can use it within our marketing and branding as well. So sustainability is not then a siloed department that's working on risk management or due diligence. Is actually part of the brand's identity, which I appreciate. I'm very lucky to be in that position, but definitely within any company, you have a set of values, and I'm sure that you can link a sustainability issue or some of those issues to your brand values. And I think that was probably the biggest advice I could give.
I think that's very good advice. But in terms of personal motivation in that kind of sustainability arena, what's yours? What motivated you to enter this space when you know how difficult it is, the challenges faced, how hard it is to kind of shift this juggernaut of an industry in the right direction? What has been your personal motivation?
Yeah, I think now I'm like very motivated by all the solutions out there, and I am a fixer and a problem solver, and so I really get a lot of motivation in that, and I spend most of my time nowadays speaking with people that are doing genuine work in this industry and trying to make things better and coming up with solutions to do that. But I think to take it back slightly, I started my career within the fashion industry and worked for 2 high street brands in the UK for 8 years. And I was able to have a career and move up through the ranks for 8 years with those 2 brands and have no idea about how the industry works. I had no clue about any challenges with sustainability, with how clothing production really worked. And I think that still exists today. I think you could honestly work within the industry or work for a brand and still be quite oblivious to some of these issues, and that's just not acceptable. I then went completely the other way and worked for an NGO called the Soil Association that works on organic food, farming, forestry, textiles, and cosmetics. And I think, being there really, being in an environment there when you're actually working for a charity that crosses so many different industries and seeing how similar a lot of these challenges are, I think that was very personally motivating for me to be in that space and get a lot of learnings. But to be honest, I found it very slow and very frustrating that I could have such a greater awareness of these challenges, but you were really relying on brands and businesses to be the ones to solve these problems. And I just didn't want to sit there and be like the activist in the room that was like, you should do this and you need to do this. I really wanted to get my hands into it. And so when this opportunity came up at Ganni to merge fashion experience and sustainability, yeah, like for me, that was personally motivating to put a lot of the education and knowledge into action and do that through like the vessel of a business.
I think you made a strong point when you said that a lot of fashion brands operating today are completely unaware about certain things in the industry. It's a bit of a blind leading the blind a little bit, you know. So in your experience, how do you think we can go forward in educating those who work in the industry? So I think we always focus on educating consumers, but not educating the people in the industry, you know, the people that work with the brand, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's why one of the reasons that I think we now as a sustainability team spend so much time with the internal teams, because the ambition at Ganni is not to keep growing the sustainability team, because if we do that, then we become more siloed from the business. The goal is to embed sustainability within the business, which actually starts with education. So, you know, if Susanna and I need to reduce transportation emissions, yes, of course, we could spend a few months looking at transportation solutions, logistics, green logistics partners, different shipping routes. Or we can go to the logistics and transportation manager and say, here's the issue. This is what we're facing. We're aware that you have completely different targets. You need to get that product home on time and into a store, but this is what we're faced with, and how can we come to that together and find a solution? And I think that has actually been, you know, what we hear from the teams that have nothing to do with sustainability, or maybe have built a whole career not having to look into sustainability by any means, actually now feel so motivated and driven by that work, because it also adds a layer of purpose to what they're experts in, or it also keeps them learning and growing too. So I think, yeah, that's just super important.
I mean, I think that we should also look at educating students, because I don't know if you know, but I lecture students at London College of Fashion, and one of my students actually did a paper on Ganni. And she was looking at how you operate as a brand, how Ganni can exist in the UK as a sustainable brand, and who the competitors were, and so forth. She did like a really good deep dive. And what I found quite curious is that a lot of young fashion students are also unaware of how this industry is changing, and how it needs to change. They are kind of hoping to enter a traditional industry, how it used to be. That's what they think in the industry is going to be like when they enter it.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of thinking, you don't really understand what the changes and what's going on.
Yeah.
So, for example, what do you think we can say to students, to that younger generation, in terms of sustainability and fashion? What are your thoughts?
I think that's so interesting that you say that, because then I also hear it from the flip side of fashion sustainability students now that are studying in this and then come into the workforce and want to implement a lot of change from a sustainability perspective and know about all of these issues in fashion, and then either can't get access to getting a job in sustainability, so they start maybe in another way, and then realizing that actually businesses are not really talking about this at all. And then being like really disillusioned from that side as well.
See, I hear from the other side.
Yeah.
They have no idea about the innovation taking place.
Yeah.
They're just like, oh, I just want to work for Gucci. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. But what kind of change are you going to bring to Gucci? I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, oh, you know, like, how can I educate you but yet not scare you from entering the industry? So it's quite nice to hear that you've come across students who actually are aware.
Yeah, but then can come into the workplace and feel them really like disheartened, because you've learned about all of the pitfalls of the industry and maybe the solutions and what you can do, and then you get yourself a job there thinking that you can affect this change, or there'll be conversation about it, and then there's just not.
I can imagine they probably feel destroyed, right? Like,
yeah,
you just kind of end up being molded into what we don't want you to be, because you have to work and earn money, of course. You know, it makes sense.
We need a balance.
We need a Trojan horse. That's what we need. They come in acting like traditional fashion, but actually are slowly making the changes in the background. But before I continue, anyone got any questions for Lauren that you would like to ask? Anyone? Oh, we got a gentleman here at the front. Thanks, Lisa. Give it another try. Okay.
Hi, thanks. That was a great conversation. I think in 5 years, you've seemed to have done a lot with the brand. I think, including the COVID time, I think for a brand of the size of Ganni, you're talking about biodiversity and, tracking emissions, transportation-wise. You don't hear of that from brands even like, not to name brands, but like the much larger brands. So compliments on that. Quick question, is that a bit controversial, but what do you think about legislation for even someone to be able to set up a brand in the first place? Because you see a lot of brands out there now, and there can be two people that knew each other and they're able to set up a brand. But we talked about legislation about existing brands, but what about legislation for a brand to even get set up in the first place? I mean, thoughts on that?
Are you saying that will it apply to new brands? Is that what you're referring to? Or are you saying?
No, I'm just asking an open question that should there even be legislation for someone to be able to set up a brand in the first place?
Definitely.
Okay.
From my experience, I think it's really important that when you're starting off as a new brand, let's say you want to design a product, that you are able to be held accountable for the end of life of that product. You're able to be held accountable for your supply chain. So when you are starting your business, you're starting with clean hands because you know what's expected of you. I think it's easier actually for someone starting a brand today than it is actually for existing brands to change their ways.
Sure, but then, but I think to regulate it that way would be, I think, the next step, right?
Yes, most definitely. I mean, I know that when it comes to policy, I don't know if you've come across it, but there are actually help desks in various countries. I think Germany is one of them, where they are helping SMEs to be able to comply to new legislation because they understand that bigger brands can do it much more easier because they have the financing, but smaller brands, how are they going to comply to legislation? I mean, is Ganni in a position where you can say, like, actually, we do have the finances to kind of be able to comply to legislation, or are you worried about the new legislations that are coming into play? Because there's quite a few coming.
Yeah, I don't think we're worried about the ones that are coming. I think it's more like how it will play out, because I think to the point made earlier, it feels like a lot of reporting and a lot of time then being spent on due diligence and reporting, which obviously takes away time then for progressive work and action, and also figuring out honestly where in the business this sits, because it's also changing the nature of what the sustainability role is for what you're hired for maybe what it'd be in the future. But I don't think we're worried in terms of like the content of the legislation, what it's saying. Like, we absolutely agree with it. But yeah, of course, there also needs to be some harmonization between countries, because we see that some are speeding ahead in front of others, and the requirements in different countries are also different, which is not ideal, because then it just becomes like very bureaucratic and very annoying.
Yeah, I think it's going to be difficult personally, knowing what's coming, but I think someone called it a bloodbath once. There's going to be an absolute bloodbath for 2026. But I think it would make the fashion industry understand that they need to make a change.
Yeah.
And I feel like being self-regulating might work for some, but it doesn't work for most, because it's shown us that, as an industry, we're not able to do that. So, I mean, I think that personally, I'm a fan of policy, but I see the problems that are going to occur with it. And I feel like the industry needs a voice in Brussels. Fashion needs to have a voice in Brussels. Like every other industry has a voice in Brussels, so why not fashion?
Yeah.
Because we've got people making rules for an industry that they don't understand how it operates.
Yeah.
And we know the nitty-gritty, so we should be involved, or at least have a voice in the making of these legislations, so they can make legislations that make sense.
Yeah.
Not something that will destroy an industry, but will actually strengthen it.
Yeah.
Well, that's my 10 cents. Anyone else got any questions they'd like to ask Lauren? God, you are a quiet bunch, aren't you? No one? Well, I think because you covered it all, Lauren, to be quite honest. I think you were very clear in telling us your journey with Ganni, and we really appreciate you coming to our little corner of the world here at Munich Fabric Start and joining us on stage. So I guess if you would like to ask a one-on-one question, please feel free to approach
Yeah.
her. And thank you so much for listening to us nattering up here. And I wish you a good afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you.